G'day and welcome to a couple of fishing tips from Nick. It's pretty much the first episode I'm doing, just going through a few of the most asked questions in regards to bream fishing in and around New South Wales waters mostly, but you know they can be taken, these tips and ideas pretty much can be taken all the way through the east coast of Australia and even manipulated and changed around a bit all around Australia for many different species. Today pretty much we're going to be talking about bream though, and what type of outfits to use when bream fishing. I'm a bit of a Daiwa freak, I like my Daiwa stuff, so most of the reels I will be talking about a Daiwa. However, pretty much comes down to personal preference. You know, what works for you, what doesn't. Bear in mind that when bream fishing, you're going to be holding your rod in your hand for the majority of the time. The type of fishing I'm going to be talking about is lure fishing for bream. So when I'm talking about holding that rod, we're talking about flicking lures for hours. You're sitting there on a kayak, on an inflatable boat, you know, off your boat, whatever it may be, or even off a jetty, you know, in amongst leases, whatever it may be. We'll start off with a couple of reels first and foremost. What I've got here is I've got three different reels that I do use for brimming. One larger than the other, however all three work just as well as each other. We'll start off with the lightest of the three reels straight off. And what we've got there, we've got a Daiwa Surtate 1003. And that's spooled up with 2 pound line. Now a lot of people sit there and go, you know, 1 kilo line, what are you going to pull in with 1 kilo line? Well, you know, a lot of bycatch that I do get when it comes down to brimming, a flathead, sometimes even the odd salmon, and 2 pound line, as long as you have your drag set correct, you fight the fish rather than try to winch the fish in, you don't have much of a problem. 2 pound line, 4 pound leader. Why don't I go for a heavier leader? Well, bream are a very finicky fish. They like light leaders, spooked easily, so you always want to approach them, you know, using an electric motor if you can, or on the drift, but they do spook very easily, and that's why you go the lightest leader you can. 4 pounds is pretty much the heaviest I'll go when it comes to bream. Some people do go up to 6 pound, but 4 pounds my bet when it comes to getting a couple of bream. Like I said, you've got to bear in mind you've got to be holding these reels for hours at a time sometimes, you know, waiting for tide changes, trying different spots, flicking at different snags, leases, whatever it may be. You want to have a reel that in your hand is not going to sit there and after a while you're going to end up, you know, muscles aching, wrist hurting. It's a constant movement you're going to be doing, flicking that lure. You want to be able to be comfortable. The next reel I'm going to show you is again a Daiwa. It's a Daiwa Luvius. The spool, the only reason I do use the Luvius sometimes is the spool holds a lot more line than the Surtate 1003. You're looking at about 100 metres of line here, and you're looking at about 200 metres of line on this. It's not really the be-all end-all when it comes to brimming. If you've got a fish that's going to start pulling 200 metres of line off you, you know, you've got serious problems. Either you've got your drag set too loose, or you've picked up something that you weren't trying to pick up in the first place. Again, a very light reel, very good quality, but again, you can hold that for hours, flick lures, and you've got no problems. The third one I use is a Daiwa Sais 2000. Again, it can hold a lot more line capacity because it's a 2000 reel. It's actually a 2508, so it does hold quite a bit of line. It is extremely light. This 2500 is actually lighter than the Daiwa Surtate, and that's a 2010 model. It's got your air rotors, or your mag seals and everything, which I'll get into a little bit later, but it's a very good reel, but the Sais is a lot lighter. What I've got on this is I'm using a PE braid on this, a Sunline PE braid, up to 10 pound. However, the diameter of the 10-pound line on this is actually very similar to the diameter of a 2-pound line, which is a fin's braid on that. So at the end of the day, you're able to flick those ultralight lures that you want to be flicking. Again, I've got a 4-pound leader on it, but at any time I can just grab that reel as well and go flick for something else. You know, if I want to sit there and get some poppers going for salmon or for some kings or whatever, the 10-pound line on this, just change the trace and off you go. So that's pretty much my multi-function reel. You know, I go bassing with that, I go brimming with that. But it's a very good reel, extremely light, you can hold that for hours. So they're the 3 reels pretty much that I use when it comes to brimming. Now, rod selection is the other thing. I see a lot of guys going out there trying to flick lures with these. Like, seriously, you could pull in a boat with some of the rods these guys are using. Now, the type of rod they do use, and a lot of people do seem to get, are the very, very tough rod at the front. Not much flick in it. So when you're holding that rod and you're trying to flick a lure, I don't know if you can see that there, it doesn't have much flick to it. What you're doing is you're not getting the full action out of your lure. Don't get me wrong, you can use a rod like this for lure fishing. When we're going for bream, we're using ultra light lures. I mean, lures that pretty much the wind will just take and fly off to the side. Very small, very light. So you want to steer clear from the thicker rods, or even, I mean, this is a very light and thin rod, it's a G Loomis rod, but you know, you're looking at about a 10 to 17 pounder. It doesn't have the flicking motion you need to really get that lure to work the way you want it to work. Now, over the years, I've gone through different rods. I mean, I've gone through ugly sticks, I've gone through 100 different brands. The brands I've ended up with now are the brands that I feel work best for myself. Again, when it comes to choosing a rod, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to sit back and you're going to go, right, what works for me? Unfortunately, that costs money. This is why I'm pretty much making this video. So you can sit back, get an idea of what you'll be looking for, and then go out, budget permitting, get what you need. One of the rods I do use quite often, it's actually a New Zealand made. It's a composite developments rod. Very good rod, it's a GD rod, extremely flicky. So this rod here, I don't know if you can see that, it's a bit difficult, but that is just ridiculously flicky. It's all over the place. This rod though, I love to use. A little bit difficult to get used to, it's a 7-footer, extremely light. You tee it up with something like a surtape, which gives you a perfect balance. You want the rod to be balanced. You don't want to put a huge reel on this thing and have an ultralight rod, because when you've got that in your hand, it just doesn't, you just not get the motion you need to get that lure out there. And on top of that, to actually get that lure moving the way it's intended to move. Most lures have to look like an injured bait fish. If your rod and your skill can't make it do that, well, you're not going to be catching fish. So that's the GD rod. Very awesome quality. It's absolutely brilliantly made. If you actually have a look, the joint between, when you look at these rods, the joint between the two halves, I tend to go 2-piece with all my rods because I do a lot of kayak fishing up rivers. I like to take my rods apart so they don't snap. That's why I do go for that. But you'll see that's not bound at all. That's actually just been laser cut. So you do have to be extremely careful when you do cut these around through bush if you're going to be land-based or walking down tracks and what have you. The ultralight rods, you can damage them quite easily. The other weapon of choice is another Loomis rod. Again, you're looking about it's a 6-footer. It's a 5-pounder, so you're looking at about a 2-kilo stick. But again, the tip has got that flick to it. The flick is very important, and again, it's the weight of the rod that you're going to be also looking at. Reading into forums, going to different forums like Ozbass, Ozbrim, all these different forums, they will give you an idea of what type of rod other people are using and what works for them. and pretty much what works for others a lot of the time works for you. So it's pretty, look, it's one of those things. It's not an exact science when it comes down to your rods and your reels. However, you do your homework. You don't want to go out there and pay, you know, $10 for a rod and reel combo, which, you know, or a $30 rod and reel combo. It's a good start for a kid. When it comes down to actually getting out there and really wanting to target a bream, really wanting to target a species, whether it be bream, flathead, trevally, whatever it may be. When you want to target those species, you need to have the right gear. Now, whether it's going to be Daiwa or Shimano, you know, there's 1,000 different brands out there, or Kuma, it comes down to what is comfortable in your hand and what you feel comfortable with.